Thank you. Thanks so much, Eric. And thank you to everyone joining us today. Just as a reminder, as benchmark participants, you've got access to a fantastic dashboard, which really complements what you're going to hear today. Really hope that the dashboard's proving helpful to you as a tool for comparing revenue trends with other orchestras and perhaps tracking also how your new innovations in terms of fundraising and marketing are playing out. Today, we're going to have the chance to hear Eric give us TRG's perspective on the aggregated data. That's to say the data that's gained from orchestras and non-profit performing arts organisations from across the country. As ever, antitrust guidance suggests that we remind you that this information is for you to use, not collectively, but in your own orchestra only. Of course, everyone has their own story to tell within the national data set that we'll be presenting today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you see, about what you see. Does this align with your own experiences, or are things playing out differently for you? Eric, handing over to you. Thank you so much.
Excellent, Karen. Thank you. And thank you to the League of American Orchestras for this great partnership to get to come together and talk about this data, be inspired by this data. And speaking of inspiration, thank you to all of you out there who are participating in the benchmark. Your sharing of data gives us a larger pool of information to be able to slice and dice and get a better sense and bigger sense of what trends are going on in our sector. And I know so many of you use this information to help fuel your strategies and your next steps. So thank you for participating and just appreciate being in this conversation with you all. And before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping things. We will be recording this webinar and making it available to you, as well as a PDF of the slides. So in the next couple of days, we'll send out a follow-up with that information. Also, feel free, please do use the chat and Q&A features as we're going through the information. I always want to make sure the data is landing as solidly as it can. So if you have questions, or as we're going through one of the slides, if you have a head scratcher, say, hey, put in the Q&A, or come off mute and say, hey, I'd love to dig into that a little bit more, or can we pause for a second to make sure I understand that? My colleague Peter is monitoring the Q&A and will interrupt, and the chat is monitoring both, and will interrupt accordingly to ensure that all that information is landing in all of those good ways. And as Karen said, this is about you. And as we look at the data, and as I travel through the performing arts world, I'm noticing this bigger and bigger gap that is happening in our industry. I think of, I have this friend John who has wine glasses that have a line in the middle of them, and at the top it says, above the line it says optimista, and below it says pessimista. And I feel we're at this moment because there's lots of amazing optimism. You're going to see in the data that revenue is growing, which is really wonderful. But on the pessimista side of things, the cost of running our businesses is continuing to grow, and in such a way that even revenue that's expanding isn't expanding fast enough to offset that growth in expense that we're having. So we're at a real challenge point. So put this in the chat if you can, or if you're thinking about this throughout this presentation. What revenue gap is your department facing, and what is one cause of that? It'd be interesting to know from you all as a group where you all are facing that. Is it happening on the single ticket side with subscriptions? Is it happening with donation behavior? And what's one of the headwinds that is causing challenge to you all, that's holding you back from solving that? So just put that in the chat. We'll get a sense of, is there a trend within that? Or are folks facing a big wide range of headwinds that are causing these gaps to grow or not get closed? To be interesting and helpful to hear from you all, especially as we think about how we use this data to create strategies together. So like I said, put that in the chat if you can. All because of this, we need to keep growing revenue and engagement and welcoming more folks in our communities into our homes. And using data is a great way to understand that and build strategies going forward. So we're going to dive into it, and very excited to see in the benchmark, we have over 50 orchestras in the US who are participating. Karen, we set that goal about a year ago to try to get above 50, so we're just above it now. So thank you to everyone who's joining in. We are continuing to welcome more orchestras into the benchmark, so this data set continues to grow. So eager to see that expand. And yes, great news indeed. So as you use the benchmark, if you've seen it, you probably have seen this screen many times. And if you haven't, this is one of the ways into the data set. It's your main screen. So orchestras and performing arts organizations who are using the benchmark share their data with us on a daily basis, and we present back through a series of dashboards a way for you to see your data versus everybody else in the data set, in this case, orchestras. And you see here, your data is in the gold. Here's an example of one, the yellow, and how you're comparing to everyone else in the data set is in the blue. So for this particular organization, on their quick dashboard, we see in the last 30 days, this first dashboard looks at that 30-day mindset. They've raised about $500,000 in ticketing revenue versus the data set of 456. So they're ahead of the average of their colleagues. We can also look at things like, what does advanced tickets look like versus everybody else? We're going to go into some detail around that. What does subscription sales look like versus everybody else, as well as donation data. So we're going to dive into all those interesting categories together. And to get us some comparisons, we're going to start by looking at how orchestras are faring versus the other headline genres that are in the data set, and by revenue stream. So something we'll start with, single tickets. It's the way in for most organizations. So this is looking at a 12-month viewpoint of pre-pandemic versus the last 12 months we've been in. So November of 2018 through October of 2019, so that 12-month period pre-pandemic, versus November of 2023 through October of 2024, essentially the last 12 months we've been in. And this is single ticket revenue. Is it up or down versus that pre-pandemic period? And we see here across these four main categories in the benchmark, U.S. orchestras, performing arts centers, dance and opera, and theaters, all four genres are up pretty significantly from pre-pandemic. Exciting. We're getting more revenue from single ticket buyers than we did even pre-pandemic. And of the four, orchestras has improved from where we were at when we looked at this data back in July. So through Q2, this essentially through Q3 plus, but orchestras were at 26% of growth. We're at 27% comparatively this time. So good stuff for our sector going forward there. In terms of per capita revenue, because when I bring this data up, people often say, yeah, Eric, but there's inflation that's going on. Are we staying pace with that? So even though we're growing revenue, have we kept up with what inflation looks like? So we're going to see what that looks like. So we've got a couple things going on here on this chart. The green bar is the per capita revenue, the average paid, not listed, but paid ticket price, single ticket price for theaters, dance, opera, performing arts centers, and orchestras. So the green bar is the last 12 months we've been in, and the purple bar is the 12-month period pre-pandemic. And you see here, all four genres are ahead per capita wise of what was paid pre-pandemic. So does that keep us ahead of inflation? So per capita revenue, if we averaged all of it, pre-pandemic was at $40 paid tickets. Today, it's at 52. And if we were to calculate through that adjustment of that 40 based off of inflation rates, $40 and $24 is $49.39. So our 52 is actually keeping ahead of inflation. Now, is that the same for the orchestra sector? Very similar. So pre-pandemic orchestras per capita revenue, $36.55. Today it's $47.62, and $36.55 in today's dollars is $54.13. So we're actually slightly ahead even of inflation as the aggregated average across all those four genres. So we're staying ahead of inflation paces that way. So that's single tickets. If we were to drill down into our next category, subscriptions, what are we seeing here as well? Actually, all four categories again ahead of where we were at pre-pandemic. Orchestra is up 40%, performing arts center is up 67%, opera and dance 37%, and theaters up 26%. And when we look, all the first three genres, orchestras, performing arts centers, and dance opera, is up compared to Q2 when we looked at this in the last webinar we had in July. Only theaters is down, but only a 1 percentage point. So pretty good continued holding steady or lift than where we were at pre-pandemic wise. So pretty exciting data there, especially when we think all of those conversations about the death of subscriptions or subscriptions aren't growing any longer. We're actually starting to see a very different story start to emerge. Okay, so what's then going on with our third key revenue stream, which is donation behavior? So this one, look at this is kind of a wild looking chart. Orchestras down 1% from that pre-pandemic amount, dance opera down 5%, theaters up 2%, but performing arts centers up like a whopping 49%. So what was driving that? What caused it? So dug back into the data to see was there a headline into that story, something that we could map back to say that was our driver. So really interesting is almost all of that revenue growth happened in December of 2023. So for the performing arts centers genre, they really maximized the end of their calendar year giving in December of 2023. Actually, what they brought in December of 2023 versus December of 2019 was an increase of 310%. Now, what was it, messaging, or had they just sort of cultivated people all the right ways? I don't know the answers to that question, but we do know that end of calendar year is the time when people give the most. So thinking about how you can optimize that when there's some heat going on, at least in one genre. So trying to keep that going as you put your plans together. Orchestras in Q2, when we looked at that, was down 11%. So actually has gotten better. Dance opera was down 20%. So now only down 5%. Theaters were up 3% and have retrenched just a little bit, but only 1 percentage point. But some exciting stats there, especially that end of calendar year, might give us some additional thought about how we maximize that in the best ways possible. So looking at that inflation stat, now on the average gift side. So we looked at it before on per capita revenue for ticket buying. Let's look at how average gift size is shaping up post-pandemic versus pre-pandemic. And again, here, the green line is post-pandemic by genre. The purple line is pre-pandemic. And we see a different story start to emerge here. The green is not as far out and isn't always surpassing pre-pandemic amounts. So let's look at average. Pre-pandemic average gifts, 1,719. Post-pandemic, actually 1,570. So gift size has gone down, and actually $1,700 in 2024 dollars is 2,122. So we actually have seen a gift yield retrenchment of $403 when you factor into inflation. So not only gifts are smaller, but pretty significantly so when you put that lens of inflation into it. Is the same thing happen if we just drill down into what's going on in the orchestra sector? So pre-pandemic gift size, $1,600 essentially. Post-pandemic, just over $2,000. But $1,600 in 2024 dollars is about $2,000. So actually, our gift yield down just $13. So very different than what we saw across the board. We're seeing a little more success, but still some work to do in terms of getting that yield to be ahead of those inflation amounts. Okay, so that's big picture when we compare ourselves to different genres. If we were to dig into a little more detail about what's going on in the orchestra sector, what's happening? So first-wise, U.S. performing arts organizations across everybody in the U.S., those 4 different genres, if we compare revenue in units, so dollars and number of tickets sold, are we up or down when we put these two together? Across the board, revenue up 23% pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, units down 5%. So that makes sense that our per capita revenue has increased even though, and revenue is going up. We would need for that to happen to outpace the loss in units. And you may say, hey, Eric, how does that actually factor out in just a brass tacks numbers and dollars perspective? So what that means is post-pandemic, in the last 12 months, U.S. performing arts organizations brought in the benchmark $831 million compared to that 12 months pre-pandemic, $675 million. In terms of units, post-pandemic sold 15.8 million tickets, and pre-pandemic it was 16.7. So again, revenue's winning the day for us versus units. In the orchestra sector, revenue's up 27%, units down 2%. So we're still seeing continued growth on the revenue side. We still have some work to do to get the number of units back ahead of pre-pandemic amounts. And what that means, again, from like a detailed dollars and cents perspective, revenue 228 million post-pandemic sold in the last 12 months versus 180 million. And then number of ticket units we've sold in the orchestra sector of the 50 plus orchestras in the last 12 months, 4.8 million single tickets versus 4.91 pre-pandemic. And what that looks like from a month-to-month perspective, can we get a sense there of what that means to us as a sector? So there's a lot going on in this chart. Some of you have seen a version of this before, but same 12-month comparisons. The purple bar is the number of tickets sold, units, pre-pandemic per month. The green bar is number of units sold per month post-pandemic, last 12 months. The yellow line is the revenue pre-pandemic per month, and the blue line is revenue post-pandemic. So you want to see here, is green outpacing purple, and is blue outpacing yellow? Again, across all those different genres. So we see some interesting things here. That blue, probably makes sense, revenue is up, has been consistently pacing ahead, but units haven't been so strong, haven't passed yet, a couple of months where it has, but units have been trailing a bit behind. When we look at this for the orchestra sector, same data set or same timeline. And again, is green outpacing purple and is blue outpacing yellow? We had some strength here, especially in our sector in March, April, and May of this year when we look at units, green bar outpacing purple bar, but we've seen some softening with the number of units as we've gotten into the summer months and even as our new seasons have opened up. Now, one question, I'm going to do a quick sidebar here because I was just meeting with an orchestra last week and they are in a swing state. And they said, gosh, we have seen our engagement in social be really challenging. Our open rates in our email has been down. Eric, can you take a look at that and see if this is that just happening sector wide, or is it a swing state thing because there's so many ads that were happening? And we have, of the main swing states, we have five represented in the data set here, and actually didn't see any correlation across those. And that was Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and the fifth one, Georgia. Those are the 5 states we have represented out of swing states. And I didn't see any significant correlation between these last couple of months and slowdowns. Now, you all may have been noticing that, but there wasn't a big difference between that and non-swing states. But we have seen some pausing or slowdown a little bit summer into the fall. So we want to keep monitoring that to see, does that trend continue, or what do we need to be doing to be lifting units up? But revenue has still kept pace. So look at what that blue line has done. Okay, yeah, those last few months as we got into summer and fall. Hopefully not a trend units. Again, what can we do? We're going to get into some of the, what are people doing strategically to help engage folks as we get into the second half of the presentation. So let's look at one thing you can go into in the benchmark to say, hey, Eric, is there strength or not strength? That there's something I need to be worried about, is to look at your advanced sales. So when you go into the benchmark, you can click on this button for advance, and it'll show you this chart. And it looks at all of your sales into the future. And there's a few things going on here. One is your revenue is the dark yellow line, and you can see where there's revenue coming in these upcoming months. The dotted yellow line is where you've been historically, and you can compare it to last year, which we did on this slide, or you can do it back to pre-pandemic 2019. And then the blue solid line is how everyone else in the aggregated data set is doing. And their dotted blue line is compared to that year of history, 2023 here. So you can get a sense of, this is an interesting something. In March of last year, for this particular organization, their advance was stronger than it is at this moment in time. Now, that could be a programming something, or that could be we're doing the same type of thing. Maybe people don't have as much confidence or whatnot. So looking at this can help you understand where there may be some soft spots coming up that you might want to think, oh, we should put some additional oomph behind that particular concert or what's going on in that period of time to help ensure you don't fall further behind. So using data to get a magnifying glass on where some of the future challenge points might be for you all. Okay, so that was what's going on with single tickets. Let's look at what's going on with subscription behavior. So U.S. performing arts organizations revenue and units up. This is not packages, but the number of tickets associated with packages. So if you bought a 3-pack subscription, this would count 3 times in the unit numbers. And when we look at what that actually means in the actual dollars and cents of it, revenue, 153 million subscription revenue versus 113, units 2.3, up from 2.6. So that story of subscriptions dying or shrinking, we're starting to see a very different picture emerge. So it's exciting to think about people committing to us again, and we're actually ahead of pre-pandemic amounts. So maybe if we have that wine glass of optimista here, we want to pour it to that level because we're seeing some interesting strength here. Now, is that carrying over onto the orchestra side of things? Well, look at that. Revenue up 40% and units up 8%. So revenue is pretty strong there. And what does that look like from a dollars and cents standpoint? So revenue up $64 million, almost 65, versus 46 for the same period pre-pandemic. Pretty exciting numbers there. And what that looks like from a units perspective, 1 million tickets versus 930,000. So what does that look like on a month-to-month basis? Was this like that story for performing arts centers in December? Was it just one pop, or are we seeing some sustained growth along the way? So why also would subscriptions be growing? Every time we read that article in the New York Times, I live in New York, so I can say that with that wink and a smile. But we typically see some article in our papers about the death of subscriptions at some point. But the subscription industry is growing. So this is an article in Forbes from March of this year that the subscription industry is seeing much wind in its sails, looking at this stat here about the growth that's going to happen in 2025 up from 2020. So we're seeing more and more people participate with subscription type packages, not just in the performing arts, but across the consumer goods industry writ large. And some of you may have gone to this. Actually, I don't know if our friends from the Cincinnati Symphony are on the call, but they attended this summit last year. There's actually a conference all around subscriptions called Sub Summit. TRG has recently become aware of this. They actually have scholarships, or they pay the way for organizations to attend. So there's a wait list, and there's a certain percentage of folks that they welcome in from the nonprofit sector. So if you're interested in going, I highly recommend going onto their site and trying to fill out one of these forms and see if maybe you'll get accepted in as one of the folks who can attend. So highly recommend doing that. And they would tell us that these are the 3 biggest growth subscription style offerings in the for-profit sector. Look at that. Subscribe and save, membership, streaming look pretty familiar, right? They also have these three that have strength as well, very different style than what we can do in the arts. But what they're seeing is these kind of pathways in for people to have products come into their lives, as you saw in that Forbes article, are continuing to grow. And it makes sense when you think about how customers are showing up post-pandemic. So this is data that Google has shared coming out of the pandemic. People want things to be easier in terms of product lines for themselves. They want them to feed into feeding their mind, body, and soul, new escapes. They want to reinvent themselves and be better people, new me, new we. The arts absolutely helps fill our mind, body, and soul. New priorities. I want to focus on things that are more pertinent to what I want in my life, which then feeds into this last one here, new accountability. I want the places where I spend my dollars to align with my value systems, to align with their value systems. So subscribing to things or having products that I can count on that also check these boxes is showing up to be more important to people than ever before. And they would say to us, the for-profit subscription sector, that retention is necessary, getting more people to come back. The best subscription brands generate 80% of their revenue from existing customers. How do our numbers match up to that? How do your numbers match up to that? Service is higher than ever before, the expectation around it. It's the number 2 reason for why someone might cancel their membership, and the number 1 reason for staying or keeping up with a membership or subscription package is really great service. But bad service will drive me away. And not all customers are the same. So think about the differences within folks. People want to see themselves in the product, and not just how it shows up in their lives, but in their marketing, in how the language that gets used. Some of you have heard me talk a lot about having variety in messages and images, especially around a growth generation we see in data is Gen Xers. They're the next, or they're the today generation who is ready or should be ready to really commit to the arts. Have we cultivated them, and are we speaking to them like we know who they are? And then developing a community within your subscriber base and your members. They're seeing more and more interest in folks wanting that out of their subscription membership packages writ large in the for-profit sector. How can we be doing more of that? Okay, so month by month, what's going on with subscriptions? Same view that we looked at before, same periods of time. So here is green outpacing purple, and is blue outpacing yellow. And look at that, from March until October, we're seeing both units and revenue ahead of pre-pandemic levels. Pretty exciting there, and consistently so. So not just that one sugar rush like we saw in December for annual fund for performing arts sectors, or for performing arts centers. But here we're seeing like continued subscription growth, really exciting, across US performing arts organizations. And same thing happening in the orchestra sector. Like, think about our renewal periods, March and April. We see a pop there, but we've sustained growth even into the spring and summer and fall so far. And not just green is staying ahead of purple, but blue is staying ahead of yellow. Again, maybe some more optimista around our investing in our subscription or loyalty type packages. What's also driving this resurgence? Well, we talked a bit about per capita revenue on the single ticket side. Well, per capita revenue for subscriptions is also up. The paid amount per ticket within a subscription package is up 28% from pre-pandemic. So $64 versus $50. And when we looked at that adjustment for inflation, $50 in 2024 is $61.74. So our 64 is staying ahead of pace. The other thing that's happening is we're seeing more folks, when they are committing, they're driving more loyalty. So what this chart shows us is year to date, 2024 versus year-to-date 2029, what percentage of our buyers are committing to 1 performance, 2 to 3 performances, 4 to 5 performances, or showing up 6+. And the green is the year-to-date so far in 2024. The purple is what happened in 2019. So look at the top and the bottom. We're having about the same number of people coming first time, but we're getting more people than pre-pandemic to come to 6+ performances. What's interesting is there's some softening in that middle area. So what it says to us is the most loyal people are committing a little more, but those people who are earlier in their stages of commitment to us are having a longer time taking or getting into their second, third, fourth, fifth performance. So the top and the bottom is working really well. How do we create sometimes what we call that messy middle of our patrons to get a little more engaged and loyal to us? So think about what are your strategies, not just to bring new folks in, but not just to hold on to long-standing folks, but think about that middle range of the loyalty ladder. How can we get more of those earlier to middle range maturity folks into their even more of a relationship with us? What do we need to be doing? Something to think about. Okay, one area in the benchmark where you can get a better sense of this is just as we looked at the advanced tab before, this looks at the subscription tab, and you can look at a couple of different things. I've checked off 2 boxes here, is to compare number of tickets and number of packages. You could also do revenue or number of households, but we're looking here at a couple of things, blue bars and pink bars. And the blue bar shows by month. The darker blue is where we are with number of tickets sold. And then the lighter blue bar is where how many we had in the comparison year. So in this case, we're looking at 2019. So like in this particular month, when we look at April, the dark blue bar shows how many tickets we sold through subscription compared to where we were in 2019. So look how much higher this dark blue bar is versus light blue. And then the pink is looking at the number of packages. So same thing, if we look at April, this darker blue pink is where we are so far this year, and the lighter pink is where we were at 2023, or 2019, I'm sorry about that. So we can get a sense of, oh, is there as much strength month by month? And or are we starting to see some dips down? People have asked us this question of, Eric, what's the right time? Coming out of the pandemic, everything seems a bit topsy-turvy, and everyone seems to be committing much later. Sometimes they are, but actually most of the time they're not. We've talked about that in previous webinars. We're actually seeing pace of buying being about the same as it was pre-pandemic. But folks are still asking the question, should I hold off putting my subscriptions on sale or my renewals till much later? You can use a chart like this to understand where historically has there been strength, and are we seeing our on sales show up in the way we would have liked. You could have compared this to 2023 to see how this year's both packages and number of tickets are comparing back. So this gives you, again, a good gut on, is this too soon? Is it not too soon? Should we be escalating things a little bit faster to truly understand when and why you go on sale? Okay, so single ticket subscription, what's going on the individual giving side? As we looked at that slide earlier, was a little less consistent of growth going on, some things coming back, but still some challenges we saw there. So US performing arts organizations, revenues down 1%, units up 10%. So that makes sense. Our per capita, as we would call them, average gift size is down. More units, but less revenue would yield smaller gift sizes. So what's going on revenue-wise? What's the shrink down? 286 revenue in the last 12 months versus 786 in the last 12 months versus 791 pre-pandemic. Units up to 500,000 versus 454 pre-pandemic. So that gives us some context about how much revenue is coming in, but from actually a relatively small number of households compared to number of tickets we're selling or subscriptions we're selling. What's going on in the orchestra sector? Revenue down as well, but units up even more. We had 10% up here, 21% here. So we're getting even more people, but that's an even smaller gift size. And what does that look like from dollars and cents? Revenue, 332 million versus 336. So we're very close to getting back to that pre-pandemic. But number of gifts, look at that, units up to 205,000 versus 169. So we're getting more people to be engaged with us. So perhaps this means we've got a stronger pipeline earlier on to start cultivating these people, to have that, as we just called it, messy middle section to become stronger and more orderly to move them up the ladder. There's growth here to take advantage of. So what does this look like on a month-by-month basis? So U.S. performing arts organizations, again, green bar, is it outpacing purple bar? Is blue line outpacing yellow line? And there's less consistency of that here, except for some really interesting, perhaps optimista happening in the last 4 months. Look at the green bars in July, August, September, and October outpacing the purple bars, and the yellow line pretty consistently for those 4 months outpacing the blue line. So perhaps if we jump in a time machine to 6 months later from now, we might see both revenue and units outpacing pre-pandemic amounts. This is a good sign of some strength that's starting to gain here. What's going on the orchestra side? Similar story, and actually quite longer. Look at how long green bar has been outpacing the purple bar. Actually going all the way back to, actually all of these, look at them. Look at all those green bars. So we're seeing units continue to consistently grow, so engaging more people. Our opportunity then is to start cultivating those people to move their giving up the loyalty ladder and get them more engaged so they feel like they're in real conversation with you about what investment means to them and to you all. Look at that. This could be attributed, this yellow line growing, could be how much higher we got giving pre-pandemic versus what we're seeing in this blue line post-pandemic. So something to think about, these opportunities end of calendar year is one that we'd want to make sure gets optimized in the same way that performing arts centers were able to do that last year. So just reiterating that, what average gift size looks like month to month. You see here the purple line is pre-pandemic, green line is post-pandemic. We saw some strength here in the beginning of the summer, but a little bit to taper off. Even though units are growing, this would be an alarm to say we need to keep cultivating those people back to get their gifts to grow. What's going on in the orchestra? Similar story. We saw some lift in June, but have seen softening since. Units are up, but are people moving up enough? Do we have the right kind of messages that says, thank you for donating? Now let's talk about what some additional investment might look like. Again, for you and for us to meet both of our values and needs in all those good ways. Okay, so what's driving this donation recovery? We've been talking a little bit about that strength, giving units up, though donations are smaller, but it gives us a larger pool to work off of. So good opportunity there. Perhaps we need to clarify our asks to make sure that they're resonating both with new folks and with our loyalists. So if units are growing up, we should start to see that average gift size continue to grow back up as well. And we haven't seen that yet. Perhaps it's early, but perhaps we need to think about what is the right message that says, right, how does this impact them and relate to their needs as opposed to ours? How are we making that case that really resonates with what people will feel speaks to their needs as a donor? Okay, one area you can look at this if it's happening is on the donation side. Click on that button in the benchmark and you can look at a couple of things here. This slide shows what percentage here up top of subscribers are also donating. And you've got the yellow bar on the left looks at this particular organizations, the percentage of those folks, compared to the blue bar, which is the folks in the data set. And we've got a multi-year trend going on here and comparing that back to 2019 numbers. But as you can see here, we've actually are seeing less of our subscribers participate as donors. So why is that happening? You'd want to dig into that in your database. You could also dive down here into this bottom half that looks at what percentage of our gifts are coming from very large, large, medium, small, very small, micro giving. And there's a key that you can click on that helps you see the dollar amounts associated with each of those. And you can track this over time to say, hey, maybe our average gift amount shrinking, and is that because of a specific dollar amount, or is it because we're getting less subscribers? There's a multitude of ways that you can look at this to try to diagnose what's going on there and then start building some strategies back up to deal with that proactively. Or you might see some strength going on there that you want to build more from, like if you jump back to 2020, like, oh, everybody's seeing some good add-on of their subscribers to donor, probably because people were donating back during the pandemic. But look for where the strengths are as well in order to build some strategies. Okay, so a couple more pieces to think about. Not so much revenue per se, but what is your typology? This in the benchmark we think of also as segmentation. So how you can look at where that revenue is coming in from different parts of your data set. So we've got a couple of categories. I'm going to bring these all up here, but you've got your brand new people. Those are the new folks coming into your data set. Those are your prospects. You also have two groups that you can see if you were to go into the benchmark and click on the typology tab. We'd see some data around lapsed and stale. So these are people who used to come who we want to engage back in. You've also got new folks who are first timers who are coming for their very first experience. And then you've got your active folks, people who've been once before, people are converting into active behavior, actives and super actives. So if you categorize these into lapsed, new, and the people who make up our continuous database, that's some headlines you can put around them. What that means from a engagement standpoint, I'm going to bring all these up. I won't read all these out to you, but there's a legend you can read in the benchmark that shows each of these typology segments, how much their commitment is. So for example, a convertee has been once before in the last 18 months, where super active has been 10 plus times, with at least one time being in the last 18 months. So the benchmark categorizes your database into these different categories so you can see where there's strength or opportunity. And it's important because of this. So if you think of 18 months as a period of time in which to track engagement, people who are at different phases have different average spends aggregately for each of these segments over that 18-month period. So on average, lapsed folks spend about $281 over that 18 months. Stale folks, almost $500. And look at super actives, gets up to about a little over $5,000 in that 18-month period. So, new customers, 194. So the more engaged folks are, the more their total spend will be. And this is across single tickets and subscriptions and donation behavior. So it's worth not just selling a bunch of tickets or getting a bunch of donors, but getting the right mix of new customers to people at various stages of their engagement with you, because not only does it sell that ticket, but as people deepen their loyalty, their what you could call lifetime value or 18-month value to your organization grows. So it's important not just to get what sometimes I call the sugar rush of just a bunch of single tickets sold for a show, but actually enough revenue happening from a variety of people at a variety of stages of their growth trajectory with you. Not only does the more participation at different stages mean they're going to grow faster to their next, but they will have what we call and statements. So look at those super actives. It's not just that they're buying single tickets to get to 5,000, they're also subscribing and probably becoming donors. So think about how many people you can grow along the trajectory and how many and statements you can create with them. So it gets you into what we headline RFMG, more people who their revenue is growing, their frequency is growing, their monetary investment is growing, and their overall growth and statements with you all is expanding over time. And just to put a finer point on it, super active patrons have a 27 times more value or lifetime value, the amount of money they'll bring to the organization writ large, than first timers. So we need people, not just at the new customer stage, but at those middle stages to grow and getting up to the super actives so we can keep our organizations as sustainable as possible. To deal with that gap, we talked about on the front end. As the cost of sale keeps going, or the cost of business keeps going up, we need more people to become more engaged to help offset that. And I'll bring all this up just so you can see it here. Puts another point on it. New customers account for 60% of our customer base, but only 17% of the revenue. Active and super actives, 17% almost of our databases, but almost 70% of the revenue. So the necessity to focus on moving people up in all those stages is so important. So if you see here, this is that typology piece. This is how U.S. Performing arts organizations proportionally are showing up in 2024 versus 2019. Where is green bar outpacing purple bar? And you see here, writ large, more new customers than pre-pandemic, which is really exciting, and more lapsed people coming in. So that's good, getting re-engaged, but we're not outpacing in these other typology categories. So what this would say is we're getting new people in, but we're not moving them up the ladder as quickly or as impactfully as we need to. What's going on in the orchestra sector? We're actually seeing a little more messy middle growth. Look at what's going on with once befores, almost meeting where we are pre-pandemic. Super actives is higher. So think about that. Those loyalists growing their subscribers, that's exciting to see. And those lapsed people coming back into the fold, that's also really exciting to look at. But if we look at optimista here around new customers and super actives, our pessimista is around convertees and actives who were not outpacing pre-pandemic yet. So an important piece here might think about, how do we get those people to their second, third, or fourth experiences? Are we focusing as laser targeted as possible on getting those folks to come back? So that leads to the question, what's working? So one thing the Minnesota Orchestra is doing is using feedback to drive invitations to bring people to come back. They ask new subscribers, why do you subscribe? And look at these three categories: programming, value, and look at that commitment to self-care. I love this little thing there. So let's bring that up again. But the importance of how people are valuing our product line. So they took that data and used it. So look at their social ads here, upper left-hand corner here. Look at that "you deserve it" language. Also in their other ads, they started, we talked a lot about this a little earlier, people wanted to see the folks themselves in their ads. So they actually started incorporating more Gen Xers into their imagery. And as a result, look what happened, 35% order increases since they switched both language and imagery in their campaign, and 23% increase in subscription revenue. Renewal orders up 16%. They doubled their acquisition growth. So think about who that audience is. Thinking about Charleston Symphony, they've really focused on growing their subscriptions and their singles. So thinking about the relationship between, if we grow single tickets, we also need to see subscriptions grow. So really being laser focused on what that means to get someone into those second, third, or fourth experiences. And their messaging highly focuses on the experiential language of attending and what people get out of that. So you could take that page out of their marketing book. Thinking about subscription, this is from our friends at National Ballet of Canada. So before the pandemic, their subscription discounts were not communicated well in their subscription packages. Their full package wasn't the biggest discount. They had a sampler package that was named by day of week, which was confusing to people. They didn't have a lot of opportunity within their create your owns, and they tweaked all of those key things now, so made it a much more enticing offer for their folks. So results pacing ahead of prior year. They doubled the number of new subscribers. So even though subscription isn't new to them, the way they've described it to people is done in such a way that's more appealing. So what are the tweaks you can make across the board? And then also this question that keeps coming up, membership. Should we be investing that? Is that going to cannibalize from our subscriptions? So think of it as perhaps alongside, not instead of. Look at what the Denver Art Museum has learned this lesson. Getting people into membership creates higher renewal rates and tracking it back to multiple attendances. Also think about Phoenix Theater. They created an all access pass that is a membership that walks alongside their subscription. You can look at the benefits that they have there. But if we look at the stats of how this program has grown over time, look how many people in the middle here have increased. They've been doing this program for about 5 years. But it's increased their pass goers, but it's also increased 13% in total packages. So their fixed series is growing at the same time. One super interesting thing that they're noticing in their membership package is people who are members are coming on average to 12 productions performances a year. So they don't even have 12 productions, but people are coming multiple times to things that they like. So leaning into making or creating pathways that allow people to participate with art in as many ways as they can makes them stickier in the long run. Arkansas Symphony is having similar success with using membership alongside their subscription package. They're also using it as a next step from first-time single ticket behavior into what that next second offer is. Become a member, and then you can start trying out our different packages or different performances. It's also helped them have more consistent pace of growth solidly month to month. It also has helped them sell out their chamber music series. So all kinds of things that the right kind of offering can create the right kind of pathway in to create that return behavior in that messy middle that we talked a little bit about. So I'll leave you with this inspiration. So if you said, Eric, what should I do? How could I think about this in the easiest way? So if you have first timers, just get them to come back, have one more experience. If you're getting those convertees to lift up, get them to become active folks by giving them priority access or some extra view in to become a multi-buyer. Get them to become a member or subscriber. You can lock them in with things like auto renews. That gets them coming back more. Super actives, expand access or benefits. That gets them to come back. And then those long-term advocates of people who really invest in the organization. Think about really in-depth conversations around how they can invest in all of those ways. Okay, so if you're serious about closing your gap, I would love to talk with you. We can puzzle through some concepts or ideas, help define your gap in a more effective way so you can talk with your colleagues about that. So the QR code here has, oh, and Peter's just put it in the chat, so thank you, Peter. A way to book some time. I do these free hours of consulting, so happy to puzzle through gaps with you, help define them, put some strategies forward in place to think about that. This will be in the deck that you get as a follow-up. And yeah, let's think about some questions that we might have here. But before we do that, I'll just share this. One other thing, if you don't mind, evangelize, talk about the benchmark, tell your colleagues who in the sector may not be in it, but to join. So if you don't mind spreading the word, that would be super helpful. And remember, it's always free to join. So with that in mind, I'll pause for a second and see in the last few minutes if we have any key questions that have come up or any areas that we should dig into further. So Karen, I will welcome you. Oh, there you are. Ask and you shall receive, right? Oh, you're on mute, as always happens.
Thank you, Eric. Right on cue.
Right.
Yeah, that was fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing this data. And I love how you introduce new levels of detail each time we speak. You know, it was, there's no stopping your curiosity for getting as much, mining as much applicable data as possible from the data set that we have. So thank you very much. I was really interested to see here the figures about how often people or how frequently people are coming. And, you know, that adds more detail to what we know about per capita spend having risen over the past year. So thank you so much for sharing that. Not seeing any additional comments in the chat or the Q&A. So last call for any questions or any comments anyone would like to put forward.
As we're waiting, Karen, yeah, that's 6+ is super interesting to think about. You know, those loyal folks want more. So it kind of gives us that real interesting inspiration to think about how do we create more loyalists with the right kind of mix of programming. And I think we're at this really interesting moment that we're, you know, I love the work the League is doing with testing out how we more effectively engage with folks in our community to do that. So the the framing that we're in this with our communities is such an important piece, and how that impacts programming and invitations, and who we even, how do we make our tables bigger and invite more people in to not just attend, but also be in the conversation about how we're in dialogue with our communities is a really important piece.
Absolutely. I've just put a link to our audience diversification catalyst guide in the chat. And just yesterday afternoon, we launched a catalyst guide on youth engagement, which will give a lot of practical advice on how to engage with young people as part of this process. So it's on our homepage, so I'll just put a link to that as well. We've just got one final question come in on the chat. Does TRG ever compile some metrics on orchestra donors' average gift versus their age?
Oh, yeah. So yes. And preview, we're going to share some data twice in 2025 around early in the new year. So Karen, we'll put some exact dates around this, but how the end of the calendar year went, but also at think just after conference, so summer, once seasons are done, we're actually going to dive into not just this data, but some demographic data around age, income level, even education level. So we will share some back. It's a great provocation from whoever asked that question. I so appreciate it, and trying to get some more data for you all. If you want to get that for your organization, there's some tools that we could make available or point you to that can help append your data easily and pretty inexpensively. Like think, just a couple of $1,000s, if even that, to help get you some demographic data around your donors, single ticket buyers, and subscribers that can give you some of that fuel. But we're gonna report on it writ large for the sector as we get into 2025, and really excited to do that.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Eric, and team. Really appreciate everything that you brought to this. And as Eric says, we'll look forward to seeing everyone in January for the post-holiday update. Wish everyone all the best with your holiday seasons. You'll be well into planning already. And yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much.
Indeed, yeah. Thank you all, and thank you, Karen, so much. And thank you, Peter, for helping us navigate the questions. Appreciate it all. Be well. Take care.